There is interpretation in English and French. You can switch it on the button at the bottom. And we would like to remind you that you put your camera off and only switch it on while speaking. And a headset and a quiet place would be good as well. And please speak slow. So we have 1.5 hours for this webinar, which is the second webinar. We already had one, I think it was Friday. And we have 3 speakers, Kavya from the ETC group, Philip from FIAN International, and Matthew from AgroLodge. And they will present themselves and have a short interpretation. And then we have a Q&A session as well. So I would like to invite Kavya to start from the ETC group.
Thank you, Valentin. It's Kavya. I'll just share my slide. Just give me a moment. Is the screen visible? Great.
Yes, it is.
Yeah. Great. Thank you. Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for giving us the opportunity to share our research and learn from all of you who are present at this meeting. I'm Kavya, and I work as a researcher with ETC Group. ETC Group has been tracking corporate concentration, technology, and threats to food sovereignty, among other issues, for the past 3 to 4 decades. And for us, the collective construction of a critical approach to digital technologies in food and agriculture has become a priority. In one of ETC Group's latest report, Food Barons 2022, we tracked corporate concentration in 11 sectors and found that consolidation in these sectors has gotten worse, with fewer firms controlling a large market share. For example, 25 years ago, we reported that the top 10 companies in the seed sector controlled 40% of the market. Today, it is just 2 companies, Bayer and Corteva. And this trend actually runs across sectors. As you can see the figures here, and which are from our report. While we noticed that firms were getting bigger and fewer in number, we also noticed a vertical integration of major input firms and tech services happening, where these big ag companies are acquiring or collaborating or entering into partnerships with tech and tech-related companies like robotic startups, drone companies, sensor companies, satellite imaging and data analytic companies, working on pest and weed detection, plant health, input recommendation, among a host of other tasks. So now, instead of selling a seed plus herbicide, these seed and agrochemical firms are selling a seed plus herbicide plus data-driven input recommendation. Which brings us to the question, what is big data and how does it apply to the agri-food chain? For that, we will first run through a broad definition of big data, which refers to massive amounts of data only manageable by high-capacity machines, which can be stored and organized in data centers, which are also known as clouds, that house the thousands of massive data processing engines. Like traditional commodities, data becomes more valuable as it is processed, particularly through artificial intelligence or algorithms. But the difference is that unlike physical commodities that increase in value through scarcity, data increases in value as it accumulates more and more. The big question is not who collects the data, but more importantly, who can analyze the data to their advantage. Big data in food systems basically means large data sets that are analyzed by computer programs to reveal behavioral patterns and other kinds of trends. This big data can even include genomic data, real-time and historical weather information, crop yield, commodity market information, seeds planted, input prices, soil nutrient levels, crop moisture levels, etc. This data is collected, stored, and analyzed through algorithms to make automated on-farm decisions. Big agri-food companies are introducing these digital technologies for reasons such as the climate crisis or the threat of hunger and a growing population. They say that these technologies is what will help us overcome these multiple crises, basically the same reasoning they gave for GMC. And also that these digital technologies will also make agriculture more precise. And that's why they call it precision agriculture, and lead to lesser use of agrochemicals, leading to better environmental outcomes, which, as we will see further down the presentation, is a pretty questionable claim. So as you can see on the slide, all the big agribusinesses already have their own digital software platforms, including the seed and agrochemical companies, machinery manufacturers, and the synthetic fertilizer giants, among others. They get valuable information that they use and sell and get a better aggregated field view of the entire farming system, which lets them issue prescriptions that suit their business interests. For example, Bayer's field view collects a range of farmers' data and uses AI to make prescriptions to farmers on how to farm. This gives the impression of providing the farmer with a view of their entire operation so they can make so-called better decisions. But in reality, it is actually allowing corporate businesses to issue prescriptions that suit their commercial interests, as I mentioned, including tying farmers into multi-year deals with the promise of carbon credits or guaranteed prices. This totally transforms the logic of the farmer making decisions on their instrument. It is now the instruments that tell the farmers through AI and algorithms developed by the corporations that own these platforms on how to farm. The company that controls this farm data will use their digital platform to promote its own preferred product and those of its partners. This will attack farmer autonomy and decision-making by creating different kinds of technology lock-ins. And while the corporations make it sound as if this model of digital agriculture might help farmers, as you can see what Bayer claims on its website, the data that is being extracted from them, from the farmers, is extremely valuable. And it is really unclear who it is being shared with and sold to, and what it is being used for and to what end. Also, the claims of precision of these digital platforms are quite weak as they only focus on a few commercial crops. So these can't really analyze most other crops, can have inaccurate GPS systems, sensors, and other hardware and software components, especially algorithms. And all of this is in the context of unequal digital access across the world. Additionally, the ability of these technologies to gauge complex farm realities, the different kinds of agricultural practices, and microclimates is in serious doubt. One thing I would like to highlight here is that this is happening in the context of the climate crisis, which seems like another money-making opportunity for corporations like Cargill, PepsiCo, Walmart, Unilever, General Mills, which have already directed money into regenerative agriculture. By that, they mean a set of agricultural practices that supposedly sequester carbon that they impose on farmers. As you can see in this slide and in the next, according to Bayer, no-till cover cropping and quote-unquote high-quality seeds, which is what they choose to call GM seeds or proprietary commercial seeds sold by Bayer itself, along with digital farming, is the solution to address the climate crisis. Of course, this is accompanied by carbon programs like Bayer Carbon Program, which it advertises as an additional revenue stream for farmers. Cargill also has its own Region Connect program, from which it bought the carbon credits generated by the farmers who implemented these so-called regenerative agriculture practices, and it used the carbon credit to meet its own net zero goals. So overall, the companies define what regenerative agricultural practices are. They set the conditions for farmers to participate and gather data from them. And then they buy these carbon credits, which are of questionable quantity, to meet their own sustainability goals. Another trend that we can see is that land is being turned into an investable asset through digitalization. By digitizing so much information on soil fertility, moisture, and land records via blockchain, the entry of land into global financial markets is also being facilitated. Another trend we noticed in our report was the increasing role of was the increasing role of actors that should have nothing to do with agriculture, like big tech, getting involved increasingly in agriculture. So there are companies like Amazon, IBM, Microsoft that are increasingly turning their attention here. How? So the mounds of data that is being collected on seed, oil, weather, sale, our own consumption will need to be stored, collected, and analyzed somewhere, right? And this is where big tech comes in a big way. Companies like Amazon Web Services, Microsoft, and others own the infrastructure itself that enables digitization. And they sell their cloud services to these big ag companies and startups so that all of this data which can be collected, stored, and processed. Most of our digital activity that we do requires cloud services, and the market is really tightly controlled, as you can see on the figure on the screen. Microsoft, Google, and Facebook, and Amazon also now own or lease more than half of the undersea bandwidth, which is what carries internet across the sea. And even though after all of these claims of digitizing being environmentally friendly, it is actually a highly energy and resource intensive process. In fact, data should be considered as a high energy and resource intensive input in input agriculture. For example, it has been estimated that by 2025, data will use up 1/5 of global electricity use. And this calculation was made 6 years back in 2017, before the pandemic and before our data use supersized. And agriculture and food data may be a particularly big part of this boom. Besides the electricity consumption, the water consumed by data centers is also alarming, and it's used to cool rows and rows of servers and computers that increases the resource intensive nature of digitization. Google said that all of its global data centers consumed approximately 4.3 billion gallons or 16.3 billion liters of water in 2021. Alongside water use, even resource mining like cobalt is linked to mineral use in many electronic devices, and it's linked to child labor and exploitation, worker injury, pollution of drinking water and rivers, and the air. Water is also used in the manufacturing of semiconductors used in electronic devices. When Taiwan, which is home to TSMC, the Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, which is also the world's largest contract manufacturer of the semiconductor chips. So when Taiwan faced drought in 2021, the government prioritized diverting water to chip-making industries, specifically TSMC, halting irrigation over 183,000 acres of farmland. Now, we can delve a bit into how each link in the food system becomes a source of data for these private interests that we have mentioned, and how each of these links of the chain produces data and how that data is turned, is appropriated and reconfigured for profit. As we have to finish soon, I also invite you to go over our report Food Barons and also watch our presentations from the Food Data Justice series, which goes into each of these links in detail. Digitization happens at the level of DNA too. Owning the starting point of the entire food chain means dominating strains and seeds. Cash crops and commercial animal species are being re-engineered with genetic engineering. This is a moment in production where the biological and the digital converge explicitly. AI systems ingest and process large amounts of genomic information and then try to predict the genetic codes that will confer certain commercial traits such as weather resistance. Machines design the codes, print the synthetic DNA, and genetically edit the organisms. On the trading front, the world's largest commodity firms have joined forces to create a new digital platform, which is powered by blockchain called Covantis, which was launched in March 2021. The firms say that this will increase transparency and security, but it's actually the governance of this blockchain is controlled by only 6 founders, which are Cargill, ADM, Kofco, Vernier, Viterra, and Louis Dreyfus. And at the same time, legal scholars have mentioned that in highly consolidated markets, private blockchain technology can be used to engage in anti-competitive practices. Food distribution and grocery warehousing is also becoming highly automated. Amazon is known for its use of warehouse robots to track, pack, ship items, including food and grocery stores. The presence of robots in Amazon's warehouses has accelerated expectations of the amount of work a human worker is expected to do. There have been injuries from colliding with robots. And of course, there's increased surveillance of the workers. All of this hints at what could happen as other workers in the food chain increasingly work alongside robots in different configurations. Digital technology also created an entirely new link in the industrial food chain, which was supercharged by the pandemic, which is the digital food delivery. The delivery food workers are already being algorithmically controlled by AI, artificial intelligence, while having almost no formal labor protection, which brings us to the last link being digitized, the consumer themselves, us. The immense wealth of today's digital giants is built on exploiting the attention and desires of internet and social media users. All the data giants have learned about the users and are using that data to nudge and manipulate their online behavior, which can now be applied to nudging and manipulating their diet preferences, food desires, and triggering emotions around food. Technology is not neutral. And corporate control technologies are not designed to address the needs of smallholders and are mostly designed to catch farmers in profit-making schemes and to render them as sources of data and behavior patterns, which can be mined for machine learning to make decisions for them, thereby undermining their knowledge, de-skilling them, and leading to their dependence on corporations that own most of the digital infrastructure, like data centers, satellites, and undersea cables. Governments are also collaborating with and facilitating the promotion of ag digitization by big ag and tech in the South, claiming that it will benefit people and help address the climate crisis without stating the resource requirements of these technologies. They may also be making the climate crisis worse with these technologies that require the extraction of mineral resources to produce them, the consumption of a lot of energy, and the production of toxic waste. Many governments are moving hand in glove with corporations, incentivizing them to invest and enabling the expansion of digitization across economic sectors. In most cases, digitization is being introduced without adequate safeguards on data protection, assessment of impacts on the environment, and protection of human rights, eliminating mosaic farming and food practices. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Kavya, for this very interesting talk, for showing us the interest behind the digitalization as well as the ecological impact. And sorry for misspelling your name the first time. And now I give the floor to Philip Seufert from FIAN International.
Yes, thank you, Valentin. Also, thank you, Kavya, for this great setting of the scene. Hello to all of you. Happy to see you. Quite a big number. I saw also some people from Latin America. It's really joining very early. So as Valentin said, my name is Philip Seufert. I work with FIAN International, which is an international organization that is promoting the right to food and nutrition. And we are also, as part of that, we also have been looking into issues related to data and digital technologies over the past years. And we are also members or participating in the CSIPM, including in the Data Working Group. just maybe just to say that maybe most of you are aware, but just to repeat it, that we are meeting today. Also, we are having this discussion also for a very specific purpose, namely that the CFS, the Committee on World Food Security, is about to begin or has begun a work stream on data for collection and use of data. And which is supposed to lead to the adoption of policy recommendations. And so the workshop today is also a bit kind of to share what has happened in that work stream until now, and also to get some, have a discussion as we move now into the concrete phase of the negotiation, to have a good and strong positioning as civil society and indigenous peoples mechanism. So I will share my screen. I hope that you can.
We can see it, but it's not in the presentation mode.
Is it yet? Is it now?
Yeah, now it is perfect.
Okay, so I will speak a bit just as we, like Kavya gave us the very broad picture a bit on, what is happening around digitalization and how, it's kind of part of a longer dynamic and a broader dynamic of, advancing of a certain model of agriculture, a corporate model of agriculture. And I kind of will try to move a bit closer to the discussion in the CFS, and I will speak a bit about corporate capture, conflict of interest, and data, and looking specifically at the FAO and the CFS. And I will do this, I will divide my presentation in 4 points. The first one, speaking a bit about multi-stakeholderism in the FAO and CFS. I will explain what I mean by that. Then have a look at FAO's relationship with corporations, and then in a third moment also present 2 specific initiatives that the FAO has launched in the past years around digitalization and what they call smart agriculture. And then finally, just a very few concluding remarks to make the transition to this very concrete work stream that we are now participating in. So about the issue of multi-stakeholderism in the FAO, I think I'm speaking about this in the context of, we think it's in our analysis, this approach of multi-stakeholderism is one of the main ways through which we see corporate capture of the FAO, of the CFS, and of the global policy making around food is happening. So what we mean by that is a proposal for a governance model that is very much about arguing for the inclusion of corporate sector directly in the decision-making structures. This happens with the use of narratives that, they are around inclusion and participation. You will hear people say, everybody has to have a seat at the table, and that's the only way we can solve the challenges that we are facing. And this is obviously like a very, in a very formulated and open way, but I think it's important to notice that this is primarily also about, involving corporations, but also foundations that are tied, philanthropic foundations that are tied to those corporations, involve them directly into the decision making. And this is problematic for a number of ways, and the CSIPM has been very critical of this. And I mean, just for a start, from a human rights perspective, it's quite problematic when you include those actors, because usually the human rights framework would speak primarily of states as duty bearers and as people, citizens, and specifically actors such as small-scale food producers as rights holders, and the governments being accountable to those rights holders, and in that sense, corporations are not directly involved in that relationships, but are a third party, whereas kind of with this multi-stakeholderism, they kind of are included into the equation. And this is all the more problematic as there are obvious very strong power imbalances between some of the actors that Kavya spoke about in her presentation and smallholder food producers around the world who continue to provide most of the food that people actually eat. But there are good reasons for pushing this model. One of it is the fact that for multilateral institutions such as the FAO, the CFS, they need resources. So one of the reasons is also to say, let's bring the corporations in. That will also bring additional resources since public funding is declining. And for the corporations, there is also an interest because they can present themselves, as being responsible and as being inclusive and transparent and kind of good-willing and committed to the public good. But as I said, we see this as a very problematic development. And just to have a look at what concretely that means when we look into the FAO. So as of now, 70% of the FAO's budget comes from voluntary contributions from member states. So only 30% is, let's say, a fixed budget, and the 70% remaining comes from member states and other partners. So that includes the states, but it also includes the private sector. But there is a huge gap of transparency here because there is no concrete information available how much of those 70% are actually kind of directly coming from private sector or related foundations. We know what is available. The information that FAO provides is that there are several engagements and letter of intent and memoranda of understanding with private sector, but not all. We don't know the full picture. We know for about 44 partnerships that are public, which include also partnerships with corporations like Google or institutions like the World Economic Forum. But there are many more informal engagements, and there's not a lot of transparency around those. So in this kind of scenario, it's very problematic that the FAO provides so little information about the financial relationship that exists with private sector and corporate donors. And when you look at also kind of what this kind of multi-stakeholder governance model looks like. We have seen this with the UN Food Systems Summit that was organized a few years ago, on which the CSIPM and also other alliances of small-scale food producers were very critical of, precisely because it was corporations had such a prominent role in it. And now you can see that in the follow-up of this Food Systems Summit, there has been like a new structure created, which is called the UN Food Systems Coordination Hub, and which is hosted by the FAO, and which is promoting now what is called World Food Forum, which is supposed to take place annually. And in a way, you can see this as a kind of like an attack to the CFS, and kind of as more of a multi-stakeholder platform, whereas the CFS still has, like, at its basis, this commitment to human rights and has an accountability mechanism. But you can see when you look into the numbers, the budget, that there is much more funding available for this hub as comparison to the CFS budget. So you can see that in a way, it's not just like a theoretical thing, but it's also the resources that are available are much higher. So for the hub, the planned budget is of more than $40 million, whereas the CFS budget is kind of a bit more than $3 million. So huge difference here. And this Food Systems Coordination Hub has precisely this multi-stakeholder governance model, which kind of doesn't ensure any effective intergovernmental control, and it is undermining multilateralism and human rights accountability. And it's just, perhaps also interesting to mention that this UN Food Systems Coordination Hub, there in the follow-up of the UN Food Systems Summit, there are different coalitions that bring forward the work, and one is also specifically on data and the digital issues. The other issue that I want to mention here, and I will come back later in my presentation, is the hand-in-hand initiative, which is a flagship policy by the new by the current Director General of the FAO, and it's a major priorities. And I think we, in our analysis, it's quite significant in the sense that this initiative kind of changes basically the way the FAO sees itself operating, and which is kind of now mainly framed as being like a broker between governments and business, and no longer like a UN agency in the strict sense. So, you know, the FAO Director General has said that, you know, one of the main tasks of the FAO is to match the making of investments with development opportunities. And a final word, I think, as Kavya already said it, narratives in all these initiatives, obviously the narratives around increased sustainability are very central. So this is all presented also under this lens of making food systems more sustainable, which is obviously a need, but we question if this is the right way to go. Jumping a bit into the concrete relationships that FAO has and what are the basis for those relationships with companies. And in this sense, it's in this context, it's important to mention two documents. The first one is the FAO strategy of private sector engagement, which was only recently updated. And so that's basically the framework under which FAO can enter relationships with private sector. And there has a significant shift in the last update. There has a significant shift has taken place that now it's not about, you know, avoiding risks, but now it's kind of managing risks. So it's the idea is no longer that FAO does not engage in relationships that may be risky, but just to say, we can manage those risks. And the main mechanism here are due diligence screenings of those partnerships, but there is missing a clear mechanism for avoiding conflict of interest. There are no mechanisms for accountability, like grievance mechanism, complaint mechanisms, and also liability and remedy is not foreseen. And what is particularly striking is that, you know, even there are exclusionary criteria, so moments or criteria that would impede the FAO to enter a certain engagement. But even if that is the case, there is still a special procedure that may allow in certain cases to still allow for such an engagement. So I think here is quite a significant shift to accommodate or to make it easier for the FAO to enter into partnerships with private sector. And this is also very much like this line is also very much enshrined in the second document that I wanted to mention here, which is FAO strategic framework, which is kind of the roadmap for the FAO until 2031. And here as well, it's very much about, you know, encouraging engagement, partnership, and favoring investments of private sector. And I will just mention that just to make, to give an example that this is not just theoretic, but it's very concrete. And one of the things that we have worked as FIAN, but it has been endorsed also by many organizations that are member of the CSIPM, is to denounce the letter of intent that the FAO signed in 2020 with CropLife International. So many of you might know that CropLife is like the trade association, which many of the, you know, big players that also were mentioned by Kavya earlier. So that is BASF, Bayer, Corteva, Syngenta, among others. And those are, among others, they are making a significant part of their profits from the sale of highly hazardous pesticides. And by, you know, entering into this cooperation with the FAO, we have denounced this undermining of FAO's work or commitment to reduce the reliance on pesticides. And we see also in this case a very personal conflict, which one of the FAO's leading people, the deputy DG Beth Begdel, who has direct connection through her family with some of the US agribusiness companies. And as I said, we have denounced it. This campaign is ongoing, but it's just one example of what's happening. Coming more concretely on what the FAO is doing on digitalization and what is targeted or usually referred to as smart agriculture. And here I want to just point to two recent initiatives. The first one is the geospatial platform, which is under the hand-on-hand initiative, which I presented earlier. And this is kind of, this is the narrative this is to accelerate agricultural transformation. And it's a platform that is hosted on the FAO website and where you can, access several sets of data that are combined there, different types of data. One part is remote sense geospatial data, and then you have statistics, also national statistics. And then, as the FAO says, this is over 2 million data layers, and that you can put together, and it's very much presented as a tool to guide companies to make the right investments. And that are based on scientific evidence and data driven, and these narratives that we find around here. This is a screenshot. What you see now, you can look on the website for yourself to play around with it, but it's kind of, as you see, it's presented very much as one of the enabling tools for digital agriculture. And when you read the text, it's very much targeted also as for private investment. The second mechanism or initiative that I want to mention here is the 50 per 2030 initiative, which is a big project that the FAO has started and which has a budget of $500 million. And it aims at increasing the capacity in 50 low and lower middle income countries to build up their data environment and scale up their use of data, these kinds of things. It's FAO together with IFAD and the World Bank. This, again, it's very much about, closing the data gap, build national agricultural data ecosystems. And what is interesting is that when you look into the donors or the financiers of this initiative, you see, among others, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, among others. And one of the questions that, for example, also to make the link previously, like for us is not so clear yet, is like what is actually the governance schemes, right, of the FAO, in a way, kind of putting together all this data, making all these connections, but kind of how is that data and everything governed, both in FAO but also in those countries specifically. So here again on the screen, you will just see this is taken from one of the brochures of this 50 per 2030 initiative, and you see this is like, it's all about, framed as all about having much data, and the best data will the more data you have, the better the decisions you take will be. Here's just on the left side, you see just the financing. So whereas you see that private sector funding is actually not very big, you have this 3% here in red, but you see that 39% is like donors and philanthropic organizations. So we don't have now the detailed data, but it's possible that there are other organizations in there. And what you see also on the right hand, this is the funders, and for example, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is mentioned here among other governments and institutions. So a few final remarks just to kind of to land a bit on the very concrete negotiation process that we have now, and also to understand the whole framework in which it takes place. I think one of the important things to notice is that basically this work stream is very much funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So that was also, the CSIPM asked that question, and the CFS chair confirmed that. So the question to ask is, what does that imply in the degree and power and control that this donor has on this work stream? We have seen in the meetings so far that the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundations participates. They have not been very vocal, but the question is also, what's the influence behind the scene? It's a question we don't know, but you could suspect things here. And it's important, obviously, to notice that, I mean, Microsoft, which is obviously linked to the foundation, is a central actor in pushing the smart farming agenda. For example, in FIAN, we have seen last year in a research we've done in Latin America that Microsoft is playing a leading role also in not just kind of pushing like smart agriculture for big industrial monocultures, but also to involve smallholder farmers. And I think this happened in different parts of the world, and Microsoft is a central player there. And this is important because currently those who have that was very clear by Kavya, those who accumulate the data currently have nearly complete control over that data, and they can use it to make a profit. And a very final point, just to say that obviously, if you read the news, I mean, we all know that there is like a big, let's say, rivalry globally is between the US and China, and obviously digital technologies and artificial intelligence is one of the fields where this competition is being torn out. But what is interesting to see in the FAO is that there seems to be, at least for an agreement among those two powers, to push for this direction into more digitalization. So kind of an agreement there. We have a Director General from China and a Deputy Director General from the US, and both of them are very much into both this multi-stakeholder approach and also specifically the push for use of data and technologies in that sense. But so this is just, we will see how that plays out in the negotiations now. And it's also important, I think, even those are the two big powers, but I think there are also other actors that are kind of trying to scale up on the tech side, and which you shouldn't keep out of sight. And I will leave it there for now so that Matt can a bit kind of say something more about this process. And yeah, thanks again for being here, and yeah, looking forward to the discussion. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Philip, for showing us the dynamics behind the concept of multi-stakeholderism and in the FAO itself. And last but not least, referring also to the CFS data workstream. And I would give the floor to Matthew and would kindly ask you to introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Matt Canefield. I teach at Leiden University. I work closely with AgriWatch, which monitors the Alliance for a Green Revolution in Africa and the Gates Foundation. And I am supporting the coordinators and the facilitation team of the Data Working Group. And I'm here in place of the coordinator, Patty Naylor, who is traveling to Rome right now for the negotiations of the policy recommendations on data, which were just released in their zero draft form and are starting on Thursday in the kind of negotiation process. So today, we just heard two presentations that have pointed out that data and digitalization are the frontier of power for corporations. And in the past, we know that agribusiness has focused on selling seeds and fertilizer, but today they're increasingly focused and directing that energy to data. Huge amounts of data are already being collected on seeds, land, livestock, workers, and consumer behavior. And amassing this data offers governments and the private sector the opportunity to deepen their surveillance, to tighten control, and to undermine the knowledge of food producers. Now, the negotiation of the policy recommendations on data collection and analysis tools in the Committee on World Food Security is the first opportunity that food sovereignty movements have to confront this data rush, to politicize data, to point out the extreme inequalities that data is producing and reproducing, and to elaborate an alternative vision of how to collect and share knowledge and information that will enable people's food sovereignty and the transition to agroecology. From the very beginning of this work stream, which we have already heard was called for by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, there has been a constant narrative that the world lacks data, that it is flying blind when it comes to addressing the challenges that we face today. And this narrative suggests that more granular and timely data is needed to support policy for food security and nutrition. But this narrative has profound consequences. First, it suggests that data itself is neutral and apolitical by emphasizing data as a universal good. But we know that data is always embedded with particular assumptions about what is important to measure. What gets measured matters. It determines how we define and solve problems. For example, public data collection focused only on certain crops can make others invisible and be used to direct government investment in research and support for only certain crops. Or public data collection can be used to identify and track certain populations while ignoring others, making them invisible. When data is collected by the private sector through our phones, machines, or even satellites, it's almost exclusively concerned with information that can be used for commercial purposes and extracting profits. Nonetheless, these assumptions are ignored, and instead, this narrative of more and better data supports decision and policymaking primarily based on data, which can reproduce the biases inherent in this data. Second, the narrative that we need more data serves private sector interests. It does so in two ways. On the one hand, the private sector relies on public data as the foundation for their own technologies. For example, public weather and climate data is a key source of value for the private sector and the information they repackage to offer to consumers. Public geospatial data provides the private sector with the ability to map agricultural land. Traffic data is used by ride-sharing apps to direct precariously employed drivers. On the other hand, this narrative supports the development of private infrastructures for the collection of data in countries where governments lack the resources to spend money on data collection. And this data is captured through apps that offer free information to farmers, food producers, and workers about weather or crop practices in exchange for data about their land, seeds, and practices. And governments that don't have or don't wish to spend the money on public data collection are eager to support private data collection in order to expand their own control and surveillance over their populations. Third, this narrative, which is often framed as an urgent response to the converging crises that we now face, supports data governance policies that enable data collection without accounting for the risks posed by data. Promoters of this narrative seek to facilitate the widespread collection of data and their uninhibited flow without addressing people's rights, market consolidation, and other consequences of datafication with the goal of enabling data capitalism. Governments have the responsibility of ensuring that the rights of their people are protected and must be held accountable when allowing or promoting data collection of their food systems and determining how it is used. But some governments in this process are using their institutional power to support the digital capture of food systems. Finally, the narrative that more data is necessary marginalizes the rich knowledge that small-scale producers, peasants, indigenous peoples, and others have of their territories. It promotes technical solutions that enable the extraction and large-scale collection of data. Digital technologies in turn create dependence through lock-ins and control over workers, inhibiting the autonomy, agency, and privacy of small-scale food producers, workers, indigenous peoples, and consumers. In the long term, digital technologies can lead to the de-skilling of producers and workers and the displacement through automation. It also provides the private sector and scientists with greater authoritative claims over knowledge based on the data they collect. Now, data is itself necessary for any efforts to bring about change. Data makes issues visible, it allows us to understand the scope of problems, and it enables us to learn and make decisions based on new information. Food sovereignty movements have many examples of data collection and analysis using methods developed over generations, whether that be through farmer-managed seed systems, farmer-to-farmer learning and information sharing, the development of farmer and worker cooperatives, the organizations of unions and associations, and many other activities. And these data practices can be the foundation for an alternative vision of data collection and analysis, one that builds people's food sovereignty, enables agroecology, respects people's rights and privacy, holds governments accountable, and shields people from the risks of new technologies. So as civil society and social movements confront this narrative, it is important not just to challenge the political and economic forces that seek to develop data to lock in an extractive, exploitative, and poisonous agricultural system, but also to demand a system of data collection and analysis that can enable food sovereignty and agroecology. So we have to ask, who decides what data should be collected? How should data be collected and controlled? And who should benefit from data? Building a response around the answer to these questions is critical because at stake are human rights and the food sovereignty of peoples to their knowledge, land, seeds, and control over territory. Now, until this point, this policy process has been very technical, with a lack of interest from many actors in understanding the bigger context of digitalization in the whole food system. So it is the role of the CSIPM and all of us here to identify the key points to support human rights, food sovereignty, environmental protections, and ecologically sound agricultural systems in which food producers are respected and valued for their knowledge and skills. And this is the challenge. So as the negotiations unfold, it's critical to be prepared with concrete positions. And that's it for me. Valentin, I think you might be muted.
Sorry, I was muted. Thank you, Matthew, for this very interesting talk. And now I would open the floor for a Q&A session. And we still have 30 minutes left to discuss with all of you. You can ask questions to the people on the panel, or maybe you have some ideas to share or your own experience with digitalization in the data world. So who wants to be the first one asking a question?
I have a question. Sorry, I can't put on my camera up because my internet is slow. Can I speak?
Yeah, go on. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Miriam Bassi from Friends of the Earth, Nigeria. I work around these issues, and my question can be for the panels or anybody who can answer. I mean, where we work, we have sometimes we come against our government. And this issue of data, I mean, it's very important for us. And I'm wondering, they will say we also use civil society. We are always fighting everything. We fight everything. And like the first speaker from ETC was saying that they use a lot of water. Google uses a lot of water for data. And we also use this data for our work. So what is our problem? Why are we really fighting this? I mean, if there's no data, if we don't use this, how do we do our work? So we need like answers. I know that most of these things have some sinister motives behind it. I just need some answers for when we start this campaign intensively at our regions, because these questions will come up. Why are you fighting this quote and unquote good innovation? So I don't know how you will respond to that if you are in a panel with, in a government office and they are attacking you with that. Why are you fighting this? It looks on the surface very sexy and very good. Thank you.
So does someone from the panel wants to refer to this question?
I mean, I can say something, Valentin, if you want.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, yeah, I don't have an answer, I guess, but I think it's a relevant question. It's about, I think we touched a bit about it in the 3 presentations, actually, you know, about kind of the narratives and let's say sometimes implicitly kind of conveyed messages, right? And as you say, kind of this I would say that that maybe we can work, and I guess part of our work as collective work as CSIPM in this work will also be about, you know, kind of sharpening our arguments, and this is why the exchange today also is very, very important. But I think, like, what I would say, what I think what we have heard today in a way is that, you know, there's much more, there's a lot to unpack those arguments about, as Matt was saying, right? There's one of the arguments like we need more data, and and that's a very powerful narrative. And obviously, and the other issue is what was mentioned by Kavya around sustainability issues. You know, we know we need to transform food systems, and so we need kind of, that has to be more sustainable, and data and digitalization is the way, and so on. So these are very powerful narratives, and I think we have to find good answers to those. But I do think that maybe what we have as a basis already is that we already can challenge some of that assumptions. And I would also agree, and I think I understood that Matt closed his presentation also a bit in that sense, to say this is not necessarily a question about are we in favor or against data, but this question of, you know, I think what is sure is that we have to be aware of the politics that are at play and the power dynamics that are at play around this data. You know, it's the question of who collects it, who controls the infrastructure, who analyzes it, upon what basis is the data analyzed and then transformed into kind of recommendations for policy making, or for, I don't know, on the farm, these kinds of things. I think it's just kind of important to stress that these things are not neutral. They need to be discussed. I think in that sense, it's also, the way I understand it, the CSIPM is not against discussing this at the CFS, or rather in favor, and sees the very importance of doing this. So I think what we can say a bit, maybe to your question, is kind of some of these narratives we can already a bit kind of ask critical questions about it. When we see, like, okay, in countries like in Africa or in Latin America and partially in Asia, I guess, like, the question is like, who already builds the infrastructure? And, you know, and that's what we have seen in our research in Colombia, for example. That's Microsoft, basically. So Microsoft is providing the infrastructure. So Microsoft, in a way, acquires a very prominent role there, and kind of can become like a kind of a monopolizing or controlling that data to a very large extent, and then kind of reproducing the same, like, power imbalances that we have already. I think where I would agree with you, and maybe I think that's part of our work, the way I see it, is to still kind of develop a bit more the kind of, if we challenge those assumptions and we question much of the way that digital technology and use of data is pushed, then what exactly is the kind of scenario that we see, or the kind of frameworks that we see that are conducive to food sovereignty, to agroecology, and these kinds of things. And I think this is still a debate that we need to have as a collective debate. And I think this process, I hope, can help us to kind of have more in-depth discussion around this. And I know similar discussions are happening in different parts of the world, and I think it's a very crucial that we do that. But I guess there we still need to refine a bit. And yeah, I will leave it there because I see that other people have raised their hand.
Thank you. One question, Kavya, you want to answer to that question? Otherwise, I would give the floor to Kirtana.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that in addition to these technologies being corporate controlled and being imposed on farmers, the other point we should be asking is we should be questioning the category of data gap and the money that is being poured, because while so much funding is being directed towards this data gap and addressing it, these corporations are refusing to share data of their own operations with us and are increasingly becoming opaque. For example, Cargill recorded its highest ever profits in its 156-year-old history in 2021. And then and this is at a time when there's rising food insecurity and hunger. and all sorts of crises hitting the world. And it said, okay, now now they're not going to share their revenue because they're a privately held company anymore with the world. So the data to hold corporations accountable is increasingly becoming opaque. The corporations are becoming opaque. So we should also kind of try to ask the kind of information and the data that we need. It's a bit tangential, but I just wanted to put it out there.
Thank you. So I would give the floor to Kitana. She raised her hand.
Yeah, thank you, Kavya and Philip and Matt. I really enjoyed the presentations, and I think it's really nice to have also a holistic view of all the places in which data is having an impact, and the nexus also with these false climate solutions and GMOs, and how they, if they have a package that they are putting forward together as a solution, they have this integrated package that profits different types of corporations at different stages of the chain. And I think it's for me, it feels clear that we have a number of ways in that we need to raise concerns on different points, whether it's corporate concentration, governance issues, false climate solutions. I think there's a number of ways we can do it, like myth busting. I think again, maybe this is a similar to Marianne's question, but changing it in a different way, is that I guess I want to hear from the panel or anybody is, do we have a set of conditions under which we, as the food sovereignty movement, and especially as small-scale food producers, would accept, or the conditions under which the progress of digitalization, open source, all these kinds of things would be acceptable or would be beneficial? And can we articulate that as part of the CSIPM position? And I think that would also help a little bit to answer Marianne's question, because I think for governments in the global south, they also, to a large extent, buy into this vision, right? They really think it's a good thing. And they think it's going to make them more efficient. Of course, the funding sources are now, a lot of funding is attached to this. So I think it would be good and important to have our articulation to very clearly to make them understand, listen, look, the vast majority of your producers are small scale. So if you want a benefit for them, these are the conditions under which you need to accept it. Otherwise, it's going to be like, a new form of resource grabbing from the north. So yeah, so I think I want to hear a bit, but it could be other people. I don't know if people have experience or etc, but it would be nice to hear that as well.
Yeah, thank you. Very interesting point to look at our own vision of the CSIPM. I think the vision is actually developing in the process about data. That's why we are really open. So this webinar is also an idea to create this vision together. But I would give the floor to Matthew. You're still muted, sorry.
I saw somebody else's hand, I think Juliet, but Juliet, if you want to speak after me, and you took down your hand. But I wanted to say one thing, which is in response to Kirtana's question, which is a really important one, but is also a bit challenging in this context. And just to give a sense of what is this data work stream about. So the data work stream was proposed by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and the focus has been on trying to narrow the actual what this stream is about to data, to this kind of idea that we just need more and more data. And it's a very important point that Kavya said, which is, actually the world is producing more data than ever before. So it's a narrative that is promoting what will eventually enable digitalization. The civil society and indigenous peoples mechanism has been very clear that one of the things that needs to be discussed is digitalization, and to bring that into the debate. But there has been a lot of resistance, not only to talk about digitalization and the collection of data through the private sector, but also whatsoever in talking about data governance, that is in putting actual regulatory standards, rights, behind the collection of data. And in some ways, I think, Marianne, your question is so relevant because that framing, that emphasis on just talking about data is in some ways meant to be a trap that, of course, we can't be against data, but it really is about drawing out the consequences and the questions about who is producing, who is controlling, and who is determining what data should even be produced. And I think one of the things as food sovereignty movements and the CSIPM, there's a lot of experience in democratizing and demanding that these kinds of questions should be ultimately determined through a rights-based framework, and one in which those most affected are at the, not just have a seat at the table, but are at the forefront of determining these kinds of questions. And so this is, I think, one of the main challenges of this work stream, as well as to determine, what kinds of role, as Kirchner was saying, as we develop this, do digital technologies play in promoting food sovereignty and agroecology? And but I think at the forefront, it's right now even a more basic question of getting these basic protections around data to ensure that those who are most affected are really protected and at the forefront of determining how data is developed, governed, and who has access to it.
Thank you. Akira raised her hand.
Good morning, everyone. My name is. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, thank you. My name is Akira. I'm an agricultural engineer from a small startup called Itumba, and it's been very interesting. All the floor of discussion, because we are a small startup that we develop digital solution to collect data and to analyze data and give insights for smallholder farmers in Africa. We've been working in several countries like Gabon, Kenya, Tanzania, Angola as well. And these approaches of bottom-up to take the indigenous knowledge and to create digital solutions that respond to their needs, at the same time respecting their ancestral knowledge, is something that we've been trying to create. And it's true that the lack of investment in the data sector and in this lack of awareness as well, because people are afraid of the use of data, as we've been mentioning now. And we've been trying to see this strategy of how to make these people aware and be part of this change, because we say that there's so much data being created and done, but we don't see a very good way of putting the smallholder farmers, for example, in the same floor. And it's been nice to go to these places and talk to these smallholder farmers about the need of technology, how technology has been already helping other farmers in different parts of the world, but there's still a lack of investment in this part. So I'd like to know if you know other, I don't know, maybe ideas or of how can we help to raise awareness from these farmers. From our part, we've been done our part through the GDPR policies, for example, and we're implementing it in our projects. But I would like to see if you see these difficulties in other projects. Thank you.
Thank you. It's always really interesting to hear from people working on the ground about their projects and problems. So does someone wants to refer to the question? Okay, I see nobody can answer to this. Matthew, thank you.
I don't have an answer to the question. I just think, Akira, it's an interesting set of questions that you raise. And I think there's an ongoing conversation and among practitioners and scholars about what kinds of technologies can best support the agroecological movement and transition. How can it enable food sovereignty? And those kinds of questions are, I think it's important to engage with folks who are also developing technology that can enable the sharing and have a sense of the kind of technical dimensions of this. But I think this is an ongoing question about, you know, how the kinds of not just the technical production aspects of agroecology are integrated in technologies, but actually a holistic approach in which they're really serving the voices and the concerns of small scale producers and workers. So this should be definitely part of the conversation that that Kirtana was raising.
Thank you, Matthew. It's also really interesting to have other knowledge systems like traditional knowledge systems transferred into data and to make it useful for other people as well. We still have 10 minutes left, so the floor would be open for some remarks or questions. Yes, please go ahead.
Namaste everyone. I am Megha Desai from Seva in India, and we work with the small and marginal women farmers, and technology has been, as we discussed here, at certain point beneficial, and there are challenges as well. We have developed some technologies which help the small and marginal farmer, the women farmer, who are from informal sector, which is designed, which can be used by them, and for reducing their drudgery and the timeline for these women workers. But at the negotiation at CFS, I was wondering that can we see the supply chain aspects, and which supply chain aspect of the agriculture can be digitized? The women should be the small and marginal farmers, the women farmers should have the ownership of those technologies as well as decision-making parts of the data that they are gathering. I was wondering how we can see, because the technology which we have developed, the Rudi Sandesha Vyavhar, the Rudi is a company owned by the small and marginal women producers, and we have a hubs and spoke model where these technologies being used by these semi-literate or illiterate farmers, and they are using it and they are making decisions. So is there any way that we can see how the inclusion and the decision making of the women farmers can be seen at the CFS level?
Thank you. Very interesting question. So I can answer in 2 points. As far I am working group member of the CFS Data Works team for the CSIPM. And as far as I see the process, it's not embedded yet, what you were asking, but we would try to embed that small-scale food producers and marginalized people have the data ownership. And also, I mean, the CSIPM Working Group is open. So if anyone or you wants to join, we are still searching for more people to support us. But yeah, we would be really happy to have you in the working group or other people, especially people that are working on these issues. But maybe someone from the panel wants always to refer to the question. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a, yeah, I think those questions, the last ones that was really important, those who are kind of also like really concerned with, you know, the work on the ground and those questions. I just, yeah, wanted to kind, it's not a, like a, I think we are all trying to wrap our heads around. And I think, as you said, Valentin, there is like still a lot of, yeah, thinking needed. And I think it's great that, you know, this process in a way can be part of that. And I think, yeah, that other people might be interested in joining the working group, and we can go more in depth in those as we move along. That would be really great. I was just also thinking on what Matt said now about the process, very concretely, the discussions. And I think I was just wanted to say that obviously I think there are references that we have already, right? And I mean, we spoke about rights, and there is the human rights framework that kind of we are always upholding in this data in the CFS. And I think this will also be kind of a key issue in this specific process. And I think maybe just one thing, I think yeah, it was mentioned that I think it was already mentioned, but I wanted to make it kind of explicit that obviously this is not limited like to issues of kind of privacy, or I would even think like, I would even put a question mark about whether it's exactly about data ownership, or at least the way we understand it, right? I mean, I think it's important to say that, because I think in many discussions, and I'm also referring to not only the CFS, but also, for example, when you look at what is happening, the discussions that are taking place around data in Geneva and the UN human rights system, I think there is a tendency still to be very much focused on issues on privacy and, you know, civil political rights. I think what I like today in the discussion is that there seems to be already quite a good understanding that, you know, the question is also primarily about, you know, economic rights over these data. And I think in that sense, in a way, it's kind of ownership is a part of that, but I think then there's ownership understood, at least when we use that term, I think we should understand it in a broader sense, right? Of kind of who kind of like in a way of like some kind of a data sovereignty idea, where kind of people have the right to, you know, to define what kind of data is used, and also to have the primary rights over using the data that they generate, and which is kind of, for example, farm related data, yeah, you know, which might not be personal data, but I think it's when we are also having that discussion at the last workshop, we also had this issue, I think, yeah, on you know, data commons, or kind of, yeah, public interest control. The last thing I wanted to say is also that when we speak about human rights, I think it would be good that we also are clear about, you know, the references that we can already have. And it was mentioned at some point today, you know, that in one way, or one key issue in this discussion is knowledge, right? It's kind of knowledge about, you know, the data understood as knowledge. And here I think it's important. I mean, we have like international human rights frameworks, which has provisions that protects the knowledge that peasants, small-scale fishers, pastoralists, indigenous peoples have. So I think those are things that we need to bring into this discussion. You know, this kind of protection of not only the knowledge but also of the knowledge systems that are behind it. You know, and then kind of if that is protected and this kind of digitalization push undermines those rights, then like we have a strong argument to say that there needs to be safeguards and there need to be like things incorporated into the governance frameworks that are developed internationally and nationally that need to safeguard those data. So I think I was just thinking also kind of calling upon all of us also to kind of to build on, you know, the recognition of rights that we have already achieved in the past, and to bring those into this discussion and interpret them from this lens. So and I think, I hope that will also kind of help us to make the argument if we can refer to existing rights and obligations that states have.
Thank you, Philip. And I see a hand there. Please, the floor is yours. Marie.
Bonjour, je suis en France, dans le sud de la France, et je suis paysanne et je fais de la recherche collaborative avec le CIRAD. Et il y a eu un projet de recherche qui s'appelle le projet COEX, c'est-à-dire la coexistence de toutes les formes d'agriculture possibles, et qui était en partenariat avec, c'était Nord-Sud, j'étais en particulier en partenariat avec l'Afrique de l'Ouest. Et nous avons pu élaborer un petit livret, un début de livret qui permettait de protéger toutes les connaissances partagées entre paysans et chercheurs. Et à partir de ce petit livret, dans un projet de recherche plus singulier et tout petit, ça nous a permis de protéger les données avec le CIRAD et l'INRAE, qui sont deux organismes de recherche français. Voilà, j'ai fini.
Thank you to give us this brief example about your project. Unfortunately, time is running up, so I would do a little wrap up and then leave you for the day. So thank you, everyone. Oh, Kavya, okay, please, but...
No, it's just the last remark. I wanted to say that it would be very useful for us to not look at data as an intangible commodity or an entity, but as a very resource and energy intensive entity in our discussion. You know, it might also help in broadening our critical analysis of what's happening.
Thank you to highlight again the ecologic impact of data. So thank you everyone for your participation. Thanks everyone for organizing this webinar, and special thanks for the interpreters. And I want to highlight in the end that the data workstream should be finished in October or November. So it's a very fast process, which makes it difficult for civil society to prepare, engage, and share a vision. So you're all very welcome to follow the CFS data workstream, follow the CSIPM on this, and I wish you a pleasant day.